folks, it's Charlotte Loppie back again with another episode of our research circle. And today we're going to be talking to Dr. Gina Starblanket, who is an associate professor in the Indigenous Governance program. So welcome, Gina. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks for having me, Charlotte.
Yeah, and so so we're going to ask you, I have about 3 questions for you, and then I have a mystery question at the end, just to delve a little bit more deeply into who you are. Yeah, but the first question really is, you know, how would you describe your research to your neighbor next door?
Sure, yeah. I mean, if I was talking to my neighbor next door, I would probably, first of all, it'd probably depend if I was in Victoria or Regina, where I grew up. But no, I would probably just generally talk a little bit about how, you know, as a political scientist who is particularly interested in Indigenous politics, my research, broadly speaking, seeks to attend to the political subordination of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And so both understanding and trying to deconstruct the colonial logics that served to sort of maintain asymmetrical and oppressive political relationships in Canada. And here I'm talking about the relationships between Indigenous governments and other levels of government, so federal and provincial governments. But then also the different, you know, theorizing around the conditions of possibility for how to transform said relations. So different avenues to decolonization, different aspects and dimensions of the relationship that we can work towards transforming and thinking through alternatives to what that political relationship might look like. And so to do that, I take that work through a variety of angles, one of which, and I think probably the most prominent area of research, you know, that I've been interested in to date, you know, what I did my PhD research on was around the politics of treaty relations. I'm Cree and Soto. I'm from Starblanket Cree Nation, which is in Treaty 4, and I was always brought up, you know, really being reminded of the importance of treaty. And so a big part for me of how to transform that relationship isn't just to invent new configurations of relationship from scratch. It's actually to look at the resources that we already have in place and think about different ways of honoring those agreements and those relationships, and ways of advocating for their implementation in a more robust way than we've seen to date. So, you know, recognizing that different Indigenous people in Canada occupy different political locations, as someone from a Treaty First Nation, I'm very interested in what sort of, you know, sources of inspiration treaty can provide for how to think differently about the political relationship, but also materially what the commitments that were entered into by treaty partners entailed, both historically and in the contemporary sense. I'm also interested, when we think about decolonization writ large, I'm interested in thinking about, you know, how we might employ the most expansive understanding of decolonization. And a big part of that for me, and something I'm really passionate about, is attending to gendered forms of colonial violence and oppression. So that sort of takes me to the second prong of my research program, which is the politics of gender and feminism, and particularly feminist activism and resistance within Indigenous communities. So I'm really interested in, you know, the sort of origins of Indigenous feminist organizing and activism in Canada, but also the trajectory that work has taken over time. And right now, I'm really passionate about and interested in uncovering what the political projects are that Indigenous women, again, have engaged in both historically and in the current sense. And then in trying to encourage a reading of those political projects that is more broad than we've typically seen in the past. So I think in political science and in Indigenous studies, one thing I've noticed is that Indigenous women's activism tends to sort of get lumped into categories of, you know, identity, status, and increasingly trauma and violence. Those are the sort of frames that we've bring to understanding Indigenous women's political activism. But when we revisit those outside of those frames, we see that yes, that was often the origin of that political organizing, but the political project that ends up coming to life is so much bigger than that, right? Women are arguing for justice, for education, for healthcare, for nonviolence in their communities, and so this is something that my research is increasingly looking at. Is how to uncover and, well, not necessarily uncover because it's always there, but how to affect a sort of rereading and a broader reading and sustained analysis of Indigenous women's political organizing. And then the last part of my research program, there's so much, it's a smattering here, it's all over the place. Kind of goes back to the part of my research that's on treaty relations, but being that I'm from the prairies, I also am really interested in, and I lead a shared partnership grant on what Indigenous prairie political life entails, and particularly what our own philosophical resources are. So in that project, we're working with Leroy Littlebear and Maria Campbell to engage with their underutilized works, or what we consider to be underutilized works, including some of their unpublished materials, and to really hold those up and offer them sustained attention and analysis. So that's the third part of my work, which is to understand, again, what colonialism looks like in specific geographies, but then how Indigenous people are organizing and engaging in activism in those spaces. So for me, that's in the prairies.
Wow, you must be the most fascinating person on your block.
I think some people want to talk more and some people never want to talk again. Yeah.
That sounds very familiar. That's incredible. You must be I know you are a very busy woman. But that is incredible work and so well organized. I think if I had to answer that question, I probably wouldn't be able to do it as well as organized as you. So the next thing that we really wanted to know about you is, who and maybe what inspired you, or inspired you to get into research, inspires you as a researcher, and in what way are you inspired by those people or those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, taking this sort of academic route, and particularly having a strong research focus rather than teaching focus in my work, I mean, obviously teach as well, but I've always really been passionate and inspired to do research, because there is so much I think that we have yet to talk about in the Canadian context. We have been talking about colonialism for decades, but one thing I think initially that inspired me to get into the work that I do was, just seeing the world around me, growing up in Regina, Saskatchewan, and just knowing that there was a lot of injustice in the world. There were a lot of things wrong that I was seeing, but I didn't have the vocabulary or tools to describe them, and certainly not the tools to, analyze and deconstruct them. And so you're in a bit of a frustrating space when you know something is wrong, but you don't necessarily have the sort of devices or registers to kind of explain those through. And so I went to, actually, I started university in human justice, precisely because I wanted to sort of attend to the injustices I was seeing around me, but then got drawn to political science because I was at U of R, and I worked and had the chance, the privilege of learning from Joyce Green, who was an instructor in political science there. She's now retired, but a strong Indigenous feminist scholar who really encouraged me to, continue on my learning. And that's kind of, that's the origin story for me of how I got to where I am. My work increasingly, is interested in still how to understand and explain and think through ways of, deconstructing colonial logics and structures and institutions in Canada, but is also, I'm increasingly inspired moving forward by the ways in which we're, I think, starting to engage in political visioning and sort of future-oriented political theorizing that is, increasingly decoupled from Canada and not quite as inclined to just constantly be responding to Canada and its offerings. So one thing that a lot of Indigenous scholars now, and particularly Indigenous youth and artists and other creators are putting forward are these really interesting political visions and political ideas that aren't always responding to Canada, but in fact are embedded are embedded much more in our own understandings of who we are as Indigenous people and what we want to see in the world. And that's really inspiring me moving forward.
Yeah, that is inspirational. I mean, and you're playing a long game. Yeah. Yeah, so it's admirable. And so, yeah, so I guess we're also curious just about, how you inspire your graduate students. Like, what kind of advice would you give them? What pearls of wisdom might you share with them just to inspire them as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think with graduate studies, it can be really challenging because you have those sorts of sources of inspiration that bring you to the work, and then that program can quickly gain sort of its own momentum and become sort of all-encompassing. And you're constantly trying to navigate the different requirements, comprehensive exam, coursework, comprehensive exams, publishing, going to conferences, and working towards that, as you write your dissertation. There's a lot of sort of hoops to jump through. And so I think in the face of those hoops, the advice that I would give is to really find your people, whether that's, mentors who are, your supervisors or postdocs or, more advanced graduate students, or a network of other Indigenous grad students and, junior professors. I think for me, that was really important in kind of helping see me through, because we all have those moments where we wonder whether this is the right thing for us. And I think, having that sort of community, whether it's at your own university or elsewhere, sometimes it's just the scholars you meet every year at conferences or you keep in touch with online. And having that community of scholars was so valuable for me. People that were also going through the motions, who you could talk to and just vent to. But also in the face of all those hoops, just constantly remembering and reminding yourself why you're there, because a lot of times it might feel like you're in the wrong place. These institutions are designed to begin with, right? They're making the institution more inclusive and accessible to Indigenous peoples. But I think there's still, while a lot of good work has happened, there's still a long way to go. And so you do have those challenges that you'll face. And so I think just for me, always remembering why I was doing that work, that constantly reminded me and of why I was there, but also gave the work itself traction and allowed me not to get to float off too much in any different direction. If I could constantly remind myself of, what was the purpose of this work? What brought me here? Don't lose sight of who you are. Don't forget who you are and where you come from, because that's what will ground you and provide that traction to your work.
Yeah, so true. I mean, those are lessons that sometimes we learn the hard way, but it's always wonderful when there's mentors, when the grad students have mentors that can help them navigate those systems and those processes in a way that isn't going to be necessarily as harmful.
Yeah,
that's great advice.
It can be so isolating otherwise, right? And it can easily become isolating because when you're only motivated to work on your own career, you could struggle with motivation in other realms. So I think just trying to balance that out, with the other things that make you who you are, and especially those relationships that drive us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's amazing, Gina. I mean, I knew you were a star already, but just hearing you talk about your work is just so inspiring, and so and such a wonderful sort of vision for the future, with your sort of generation of researchers coming up and then you mentoring the next generation. I think it really does give us all a lot of hope. And so I have a little surprise question for you, just some little mystery question, just to help people get to know you. It's just a silly question. So if you could be any, I think it's, is it plant? Yeah, if you could be any type of plant or animal, what would you want to be?
Well, I feel like this, I'm cheating here because my 7-year-old daughter constantly asks me what kind of animal I would be. And I would 100% be a sloth. Just there is nothing that I would rather be than a sloth. And, you know, to just literally be able to laze around and not feel bad about it, I would be the best sloth.
That's a great answer. That's hilarious. We have not heard that answer before.
Sloth.
May I ask, is a 2-toe or a 3-toe sloth?
Yeah, that way you don't have to work as hard. You got one extra toe.
Yeah.
Help do the work of moving an inch an hour or whatever they do. Listen, Gina, it's been so amazing to talk to you. I know people are going to really enjoy hearing about your work and about your sloth vision. We'd all like to do that. Yeah, thanks again. It was really great, great talking to you. Hi, folks. Charlotte Loppie here again with our research circle for HSD, and we're really happy today to be joined by Jasmine Dionne, who is a PhD student in the Indigenous Governance program. Her PhD supervisor is Heidi Stark, and Gina Starblanket, who we just talked to earlier, is also helping with on her supervisory committee. So welcome, Jasmine. So good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you too.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time today. And yeah, we're just going to get down to some questions that we have for you. And basically, first question is just, can you tell us a little bit about what you're currently working on as a grad student in HSD?
Yeah, so I have recently finished my comps and now I'm in that dissertation proposal stage. And part of that is like working through what I am going to research for my dissertation. So a little bit of background around that is that I am Métis and Nehiyaw from northeastern Alberta. And in the region that I come from, the Cree word for where I'm from is Sakawainuak, which means boreal forest or people of the boreal forest. So my research is premised on that region and the Cree, Métis, and Dene people that all live there. And I will be looking at sort of the diplomatic relationships that they've had previously in the past and how those diplomatic relationships can actually inform us about certain principles around kinship and care and protection when it comes to gender-based violence and sexualized violence against Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and LGBTQ plus folks. So I am mostly looking at right now sort of the archival pieces, and so I've asked to get those pulled out, so I'm like getting ready for that, but the other piece of the dissertation proposal means that I am looking at the process of starting a research advisory council, which is something that I've been able to be a part of in the past, but I've never actually formulated before. So I think, yeah, that it's like a challenge in and of itself, but it's also very fun. And like, it's kind of cool because it's starting to feel a bit like when I go home, I feel like my family is recognized. Like when I walk around, people are like, oh, like you're Sally's niece, and like all of that sort of comes together. So like there is some comfort in making that council too. So that's sort of where I'm at in my research.
That's great. How exciting for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And so what do you find most interesting or inspiring about or the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think I mean, at times it's very hard because the nature of the thing that I'm studying is very harsh and something that I also have personal experience in. So it can be really hard. But I think the pieces that I find most interesting is when I come across like written pieces that are like I'll be looking through different texts and pieces of literature, and then it's like I came across a book that was like voices from Alberta elders, and there were people that I recognized in the book, like people from a community that's just like 40 minutes from where my house is. And so yeah, there's those pieces where it's like, oh, like this feels right because I know I'm doing it for the people that I belong to. And this is also like an issue that is at a much wider scale, but I'm taking it into like that regional focus, and maybe that even though like I don't want to pan indigenize what I'm doing, if other Indigenous communities look at the work I'm doing, they might find something that resonates with them that they can take into their own hands. And I think that's what I find most interesting, is that like there's relationships that are being created also out, like not in person, but through archives and literature and those sorts of things. So I definitely feel like at home in it.
That's awesome. So you mentioned that the work can be challenging. And so what aspects of the work do you find challenging?
There's quite a few. I think, I mean, the first part is sort of the piece of like, I have experienced this sort of violence in my youth, and then knowing that it's such a big problem back home, talking to just like even my aunties and my cousins and sort of what they face on an everyday basis. It's hard to not let that constantly sit with you. So I try to like do what I can for my own like mental health. But another challenging piece, I think, is going home and sort of talking about something that is related to extractive industry, which like I'm very aware of the nuance around that, that there's the extractive industry where I'm from has a monopoly on employment and education in the area, because you have to drive 5 hours south of where I'm from to be able to get a job that isn't involved in the oil sands and that sort of thing. So talking about man camps and extractive industry can put up a big wall for a lot of people when they want to be able to listen to what I'm doing, but they're also very protective of like, I have to feed my family and like all of those elements. And I'm like 100% aware of that. And I know the nuance. I'm just sort of trying to look at the way that patriarchy has been embedded. And so a lot of people put up walls around that, and it can be hard to have discussions that don't have harsh conflict. So it's kind of hard. Conflict management is something that I'm like sort of learning how to like embrace in a way that's like culturally safe, and also respects that like what's really important here is getting at the fact that the person I'm talking to, their sister has been experiencing violence and those sorts of things. So it's just kind of really focusing on the problem at hand and getting those sort of walls put down to be able to have those conversations. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Well, and that really does require you to, really enhance or develop skills beyond the research. So a lot of graduate students are, the environments in which they're doing their research are not as complex or as conflicted. And so, yeah, I mean, it really, and I know that you're getting great support from your mentors, and so I'm happy to hear that. But yeah, I understand that that's a whole different set of skills that you're developing and doing that kind of work. So, and we're all very grateful for it. So, you're going to be, so you're starting your research now or soon. And so that's a couple more years to go. But congrats on completing your comprehensive exams. That's a huge achievement. And so if you could get a wish granted for the future, for after you've graduated, what would that be for you?
I really want to like take a break from academia. Like my other passion is I really want to go to culinary school. And like I want to go with my mom. We've actually talked about this because my mom is super interested. And she's an amazing cook, but she's kind of just been like, I'm a home cook, I don't really need. I'm like, how cool would it be if we went to culinary school together? So like the biggest wish would be to go to culinary school with my mom and like learn food science and that sort of stuff. So yeah.
That's amazing. I'm going to have to make my daughter go with me.
Yeah.
It's Jasmine's fault. That would be a lovely. Yeah. A couple of years ago, my daughter actually gave me a gift certificate for it's just a culinary class.
Oh, cool.
We haven't gone yet because of the lockdowns, but we're really excited about going and learning how to cook together.
Yeah, no, that's amazing.
So we have a sort of a fun question, a little mystery question, just so folks get to know you a little bit better on a personal level.
Yeah.
And so the question is, if you could live anywhere in the world for however long you wanted to, it could be a short, a year, could be the rest of your life, where would it be?
Ooh, that's hard. I would say Turkey, because so on my dad's side, I'm Korean Métis, but on my mom's side, my mom immigrated from Turkey when she was 10. Never been, but I've watched so many, there's like the Netflix series Chef's Table. There's this really cool Turkish chef that's from there, and I was like, oh, I might want to go there. So I would say Turkey, and I would probably live there indefinitely.
That would be so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is Budapest in Turkey?
I don't think so.
Okay. Then I have no idea.
But I can Google it.
But I know that Turkey is, the culture is very rich. Yeah. And I think the climate is pretty warm. I don't think
Oh, it's so warm. Like in the summer, it's like plus 44.
that's very warm. Yeah. That's awesome. Listen, it was so nice to talk to you, Jasmine. Jasmine and I know each other from some other projects we worked on before, but it's really nice to hear about all your research and and just the work that you're doing is really amazing. So appreciate your time so much.